introduce you to our moderator for panel one, Professor Derek Reveron, who's a member of the Naval War College faculty and the EMC Informationist Chair here at the War College as well.
Well, thank you, Mike, and good morning again. It's my pleasure to introduce the first panel, and I think it's a great follow-up to what Secretary Work laid out in terms of the importance of the maritime environment. And then also Ian Bremer really gave us a good geopolitical context. And now we're going to drill down a little more deeply. Former Naval War College President, Vice Admiral Art Zebrowski, he once wrote, "If you do not create your own future, you'll become the victim of the future created by someone else." And so in a guise to understand this, our first panel considers emerging global trends and strategic challenges over the coming decades that may impact international security. Our panelists bring a diverse set of views. Their full bios are in your program or online, but I would like to briefly introduce them. First, Dr. Susan Avery. She's the president and director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, and she's a thought leader in atmospheric research, climate variability, and water resources. Having produced more than 80 articles, she has an extensive scientific background and has worked closely with NOAA to help formulate a national strategic science plan for climate research. Today, her presentation will shed light on environmental factors that may impact national security. Next is Dr. Marvin Citron. He's a futurist and the founder of Forecasting International. U.S. News and World Report called him one of the nation's foremost futurists, and he's no stranger to the Navy, having spent more than 20 years supporting R&D planning and forecasting. He's published more than 36 books, and his research has been valued by government and industry, both domestically and internationally. And last but not least, Dr. Robert Lieber. He's a professor of government and international affairs at Georgetown University. He previously served as chair. He's published 16 books, and he's a recognized expert on U.S. foreign policy and international affairs. His latest book is called Power and Willpower in the American Future: Why the United States is Not Destined to Decline. We know that none of these insights today will help us predict the future, but certainly will gain a better appreciation for the forces that are shaping the future. And by doing so, that'll set the context for our discussions about strategy and the future force structure. So to begin, I would like to invite Dr. Avery.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, so the mic is working very good. Well, after those first two introductory keynotes, I just hope I can be as passionate and interesting as they have. I am humbled to be standing in front of you as an atmospheric scientist in charge of an oceanographic institution and on a panel talking about strategic challenges. I find this to be a really interesting sort of intersection of ideas. And what I do is I feel what I can bring to this discussion that you're having over the next couple of days is the expertise an institution like the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution has in understanding the complex interactions of the ocean with the atmosphere, land, ice, and increasingly humanity. On decadal timescales, we are likely to continue to see major environmental signals of change associated with a warming, high CO2 world. Relatively few of these changes will be benign, and many might sow the seeds of conflict. Let's hope this works. Okay. So I'm going to briefly focus on three areas of climate disruptors that have the potential to alter geopolitics in the next half century. Arctic sea melt, sea level rise, and the intensification of the water cycle. All three of these changes have been observed and intimately involve the ocean. Where, how, and how fast these changes will occur will very likely determine the mass movement of large numbers of people, the stability of governments, and the ability of large portions of the Earth's surface to support human populations. This slide that I've been having you look at here actually comes from the World Economic Forum, and it displays the perceived likelihood of risks versus the perceived impact as measured in economic terms. Surprisingly, and I've just kind of circled a few of them there that you see, on the right is very likely to occur, and on the top, of course, is the high cost of the impact. And I've circled or pointed out a few of these. climate change, water security, food security, storms and cyclones, flooding, biodiversity loss, earthquake and volcanoes, air pollutions, many associated with disruptions in the relatively stable climate we've had over the last few years. These are all under stress and change and all associated with a large forcing function, mainly the humans that humanity exerts on the planet here. Clearly, the defense community has thought about the relationships between these environmental changes and security. A 2011 report by the Defense Science Board concluded that many of the trends we see occurring in Earth's climate are likely to continue. And they said adaptation efforts must focus on supporting human security, political continuity, and system resiliency in things like water, food, health, and energy. How well we meet these challenges will have a fundamental impact on the global security landscape of the future. A 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review and several other studies out there have concluded that climate change could have significant geopolitical impacts around the world, contributing to poverty, environmental degradation, and the further weakening of already fragile governments such as those in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, to get the stage going at the importance of the role of the ocean, you have to realize that the ocean really holds the vast majority of Earth's heat. And what this diagram here shows you, of course, is the trends in that ocean heating versus the land plus atmosphere. And clearly, this is just associated with the fact that water can hold heat more than the atmosphere or the land. It also covers, obviously, 70% of the planet, holds about 97% of the free water, and a warmer ocean also breeds stronger tropical storms and evaporates more water into the atmosphere. The ocean's ability to store heat means that any warming we experience now will likely be with us for decades, even if we were to revert to pre-industrial CO2 emissions immediately. Basically, let's go to the first sort of area that I was talking about, and that is in the Arctic. As the air and warm water and sea ice in the Arctic is dissipating at an alarming rate, and that's the diagram on the left here. You can see the decline, the extent of sea ice. It's at its new lows, and it continues to decline. As a result, there's obviously anticipation that new lanes for shipping will open and access to major resources, particularly oil and gas, will become available. And I think both of the previous speakers spoke eloquently about the new opening, if you will, of a part of the ocean that has really been inaccessible to human occupation. In some eyes, this is a very good thing, and there's already great interest, obviously, in the energy and transportation potential of the Arctic Basin. Certainly Russia, as on the right, basically is showing Russia's claims claiming extensive parts, if you will, of the Arctic Basin under the UN Law of the Sea Treaty, which the United States has yet to ratify, and is planning on an extensive energy infrastructure in the area. With shipping lanes opening, trade routes between Russia and Asia will be able to boost their own economy. And of course, at the same time, we see the potential of conflict on every border that is existing in the Arctic, and perhaps maybe this sort of figurative Cold War of the last century could become the sort of literal Cold War of the future. In the changing Arctic environment, access to a new ocean will require lots of new equipment. Icebreakers, autonomous underwater vehicles that are capable of going under ice, and new forecast capabilities. I mean, if you're really looking at this as a major shipping route and trade route, you're going to be able to forecast where the ice is, where's the ice location, how long is it going to be, and the extent it's going to be there. You're also going to have to do a good job at Arctic weather, really requiring the ice, atmosphere, and ocean modeling capabilities to increase. Let's look at a second sort of environmental global trend, and that is rising sea level. In a warming planet, sea level will rise. About 1/3 of the observed increase is due simply to the fact that warmer water expands. And of course, a lot of it is associated with the increased melting of land-based glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica. The figure on the left basically shows the past and projected sea level rise in centimeters based on observations and model projections to the year between about 1870 and 2100. The blue shaded areas that you see is a conservative projection from the last IPCC The higher gray and dashed areas, line projections, include the accelerated losses of ice sheets from Greenland and Antarctica, impacts that were not included in the past IPCC report, but most certainly will be included in this next report that's ongoing as we speak. As sea levels rise, storm surges run the risk of reaching further inland, and if you look on the right, I'm showing Norfolk there. You'll recognize the Norfolk on the right, and you're probably trying to estimate where an important pier or building or house might sit. So these are certainly significant things, and with naval bases clearly on the ocean, these are important dimensions to take into account. While developed world may likely adapt to rising sea levels. It will be costly in replacing our infrastructure, but the potential adapt is there. In places like Bangladesh or Western Africa, the encroaching seas could potentially displace millions of people in already very unstable areas or regions, or to create widespread refugee problems for countries unprepared for internal mass migrations, migrations across borders, or even long-distance migrations across the planet. And this just lists some of the cities in the area with a 1 meter rise. Bangladesh, 3 million hectares submerged and 15 to 20 million people displaced. India, 7 million, 2 million, 10 million, 4 million. Maldives, completely submerged. So you get the idea of what we're talking about in terms of an enhanced sort of increased sea level rise and the associated storm surge. Oops. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to go to the third thing, and that is water and the water cycle. Here's our planet. Looks like we have a lot of water. Okay? And I start with this slide because I want to demonstrate what happens when you take all of that water off and what we're really talking about when we talk about this precious resource water. That's all the water on the planet, salt water and fresh water. Clearly, it's quite a small volume. That is all of the fresh water that just popped out, and that tiny little one is all of the available fresh water. Okay? So what really looks like a planet dominated by lots of water that the Navy has to maneuver on and work in and on and around and in, and it has a lot of coastlines, is clearly not a lot of water when you're looking at what sustains us as human beings, okay? The availability of fresh water. And I don't believe that there's been enough talk yet about the implications of a warming world or high CO2 world in what is happening to the intensification of the water cycle. Now, most of the water is in the ocean, okay? And the ocean holds it because, it's from the historic or the geological creation of the planet. But as a result, the ocean plays a very, very central role in the global water cycle. Many times we just talk about the fresh water, that tiny little dot at the end there. You want me to show it again? Okay, let me show it again. Oops. Oh, it's who's, okay. All right. There you go. Okay. Okay. And basically, what's coming out in the scientific research is a sort of a better understanding, or clues, or signals, or evidence that really shows the intensification of the water cycle or of a changing water cycle. And in particular, if you look at when there's that small part that's just the available fresh water, most of that fresh water on the planet is in our rivers, it's in our groundwater systems, and it's managed. It's managed extensively. We manage our water systems pretty extensively, okay? So the real question is, how is that fresh water really going to be changed? Is there going to be too much? Is there going to be too little? Is it going to be in the right places? Are we going to be able to manage it in the future for our uses? So there's been some recent studies that kind of bring clues to what's happening, and in particular clues from the ocean that might give us some ideas of what might be happening to this water cycle. We are beginning to see changes in the ocean that would have implications far inland with respect to the water. On the left of here, you see a map of changes in salinity across the face of the ocean over the past 50 years. This is a fairly recent result. The salinity of the upper ocean is not uniform around the globe because some places on the ocean, I mean, when we think about what it rains, we only worry about what it rains on unless you're in the Navy. You're the only ones that worry about rain on over the ocean, okay? But most people in this country worry only about rain on the land, okay? But so this diagram is pretty unique because it's really sort of showing you the fact that on some places it's going to rain more than what's evaporated off the ocean. And in other places it's going to basically evaporate more than what it rains. So there's a constant flux. The water cycle isn't increasing in volume or anything. So we're beginning to see these changes in the salinity here across the face of the ocean. The salinity of the upper ocean is not uniform because of what I just said, the balance between rain, precipitation, and evaporation. This means that some places are changing in a way that the places are getting fresher, and others where the ocean is getting saltier. Okay? So the places where net rainfall exceeds evaporation are in fact becoming fresher over time, and where net evaporation is higher, those areas are generally becoming saltier. So the salty areas in general are becoming saltier, and the fresh areas of the ocean are becoming fresher. Okay? This is the most direct evidence that we have scientifically yet that the planet's water cycle is changing, with precipitation becoming more sharply distributed across the face of the planet. And shorter, wetter places will likely become wetter, and drier places will likely to become drier. And this is important for places as seen in the figure on the right, like Central and Sub-Saharan Africa, which basically where water is already scarce, or scarce either physically or economically. There's likely to even become harder to find water. But too much water can also be a problem, as we've seen in the last few years, as water can at the wrong time of year. Certainly heavy floods can wipe out towns and villages. An early monsoon can also wipe out a year's crops just as completely as a drought. And when you think of the Asian monsoon and the number of people on this planet that rely on the Asian monsoon, which is about 50%, you really understand the precious sort of understanding of what's going to happen with that museum. A failure, basically, historically, has been demonstrated that a failure in the monsoon can actually wipe out complete civilizations. In the Intermountain West, we always say, we speak the saying that, attributed to Mark Twain, that whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over. The real question is what the future, if that will extend beyond the Intermountain West into a global sort of fight over precious water resources. Let me end with what I think is really exciting. The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and the Office of Naval Research in the Navy have worked together for decades. We're founded by Navy and have had a strong relationship with the Navy. And we're at a position, a point in time, where the technology has evolved so dramatically of getting access from a research perspective into the ocean, and certainly for the Navy as well into its battle space environment in the ocean. And just the ability to take all of these assets, robotics, new communication systems, autonomy, endurance, all of these are basically going to be changed to the way we put observing networks together in the ocean. Will transform the way we take a look at science, and perhaps in the future transform the way you work in the ocean through the Navy in tackling some of these security issues. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I thank you, Dr. Avery, and we'll have plenty of time for questions, so write those down.
Good morning. I'm going to I've just cut this down from 25 minutes to 15, so hold on, we're going to move quickly. Before I even start, there's a couple things you can make notes on. If all the slides I'm going to use and the presentation has been written, if you contact Mike Sherlock, you can get copies of it. There's 2 other papers that this was based on. Also within the past year, they were published in the World Future Society. One is called A Technology Timeline, out for 30 years, what will happen when, and another one is called 52 Trends That Affect the United States. So those papers you can get if you contact Mike Sherlock here at the War College. I'm going to start by one statement that's going to shake people up, but I think he was right when he said it, and it was Admiral Rickover. He said, the Navy has 2 kinds of ships. We have submarines and we have targets. We ought to get rid of targets. He was right then, and he's even more now with GPS and with the missile systems we have, and at 30,000 feet. With the optics we have, we can read your wristwatch. So when you start saying what's happening, the thing that's messing things up, and very quickly, has been science and technology. Our strength, what made the United States great, is really innovation and our entrepreneurial spirit and research and development. Those are our basics. We've done well, we're risk takers, and we leave the rest of the world behind. I know it's not nice to say, but the truth is we are a leader because of our innovation and our capability in those areas. So the papers you can get by contacting Dr. Sherlock, and we'll start now with someplace here. This is going to go very quickly. What that said in essence is that the shape of the global economy is based on our own economy and society and technology and politics. And it's a feedback loop. It also works on itself, so it feeds on itself. Rather than go into detail, again, the paper has this, but the core elements of the U.S. Navy mission is a forward presence, a deterrent or deterrence, sea control, power projection, maritime security, and humanitarian assistance. Each of those is written up in some details, a couple of pages worth, which you can read later, but on time constraints, we're going to skip. This just says, here are the global trends on warfare. What this says in excess is the United States has 9 times the amount of money we spend on defense as the rest of the world. The rest you can forget about. But we are changing in a major way. We're bringing back all of our troops from overseas. They don't have to be there except for the Marines in the embassies. Other than that, we're getting away from a garrison economy. First of all, we don't need them overseas. We can fire any place throughout the whole world in less than an hour and a half and hit a target 4 inches. So we don't have to have people overseas, and we don't have to have a presence. So you don't need garrison support. We can get there when we have to. And a garrison only becomes a target, so you don't need it. These are the new technologies that make weapon systems that we have available today. And again, most of these things are unmanned submarines, the stuff we've got over here for drones. Unmanned is the way to go. Let me tell you, over half of our Air Force and naval flyers will never fly in combat. The training they get in simulators, and within 8 years, we'll have no pilots flying in any airplanes. They'll all be unmanned. Now that's major, that's not minor. We're not quite as bad off on the fleet. The ship's crew size will drop by 60%, and most will be automated. And you'll have to have a person on the ship to override the automation. This is the new equipment and missions. You'll see there's 5 here. Each of those is written up in 2 or 3 pages as well, but let's talk about them. There's aerial, unmanned, fleet, a complete unmanned fleet, surface sea craft, also unmanned. Then you'll have the undersea unmanned vehicle, ground unmanned vehicle, and space, of course, unmanned. So we're talking about a whole major change here. And I didn't even talk about a 40% cut by 2014 in the defense budget. So other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Air war. Today there are more, well, this is what I was saying earlier. They're being trained over half to fly from the ground as opposed to being in the aircraft, and within 8 years, I said 10, 90% of the aircraft will have no pilots on board, and some will be programmed before they take off. So we're talking major changes, and this is not just pie in the sky, it's based on factual data. The Naval Missions will have joint special operations, insertion, getting people out. Submarines may well even have a compartment for a helicopter. It'll quickly come up to the surface. You'll let the helicopter get out, look around, do what it has to do, pick up people, insert them, take them out, or do what you have to do then and get out of there. And that's a big difference. And most submarines won't go down deep, because down deep you can pick them up on sonar, airplanes, or even a, quote, flying submarine could be picked up. The place to hide your ships is 6 to 8 feet below the surface. That's where the turbulence is, that's where you don't pick them up, and that's where they're dangerous because someone from the shore can take them out. So it's different things than what we have. It makes it extremely difficult for the older officers who haven't had that kinds of experience or have access to that. The kids grow up knowing, well, what the hell, everybody knows that. That's a big difference. That's supposed to be insertion and extraction, littoral for close to the office, and this is the mobile over-the-horizon sea bases. That's our friend Rick over again, 2 kinds of ships, submarines and targets. This is the new submarine missions, and I've written them down here very quickly. The multi-use unmanned air vehicle support from Trident launch tubes, the business here on mini submarines, littoral ops, special missions and UVs, retrofitted Ohio-class sea base, and the support for special operations, insertion, getting in, getting out, etc. I'm going quickly here, but again, the paper has all this, and you've got the slides. The thing we're going to have more and more in the future is the battlefield is going to be incorporating everything, not only communications and cyber attacks, and you're going to have it all right there in the communications. Our communications is moving so quickly, we can't keep up with it. And that's a problem in the future. Less troop transport for major land wars. We're going to have fewer people overseas. It's not the garrison concept anymore. It's get there, get out. Primarily, it'll be object lessons, something we learned a long time ago from the Russians. I'll hit the hell out of him to tell you, see what I could do, don't you? That's what we could do in the future. We use object lessons, and we can get in and get out. We don't have to be there for troop transport anymore because the people don't have to be there. It's no more, put it honestly, no more boots on the ground. 5 minutes? Okay, we'll cover it quickly. You can read this, pick up the slides. The slides are good, and the reading material to go with it. Economics, stagnation, constraints, funding, you're aware of that. Emerging economies, and the BRICS are growing. Britain, Russia, industry, and China, and they're getting more and more money for R&D. R&D in general is growing. With the advanced concepts, let me put it to you bluntly. By 2030, computers will be brighter than people. They can operate, take data, get it out faster, analyze quicker. Let's hope they keep us as pets. Use of the 21st century tech solutions are going to be becoming more important. Cyber warfare is getting to be a major thing. You want to find out, talk to your grandkids. And of course, cyber attacks on U.S. forces are disrupting the battle space, the computers, and the communications. I know I've only got about 2 minutes left, so let's go. Singularity. Everything is being incorporated to the extent that we expect by 2025 to have chips put into people's brains where the man-machine concept can work and work very effectively, and you won't get infections. That's what I said. They keep us as pets. Let me talk about that for a moment, and then we'll take questions. When I graduated in 1952 from Penn State, the idea was there are 4 areas: ideas, inventions, innovation, imitation. It was called the product cycle. 30 years from a Nobel Prize in 1952, from the idea till we could put it on board ship and kick it and make the damn thing work. White hat proof. 30 years. You know what it is now? 7 to 8 weeks. So that's what shows. And by the way, why? Some people say, why is it going so quickly? Why are they getting these ideas? How is it happening? 80% of all the engineers, scientists, physicists, chemists, doctors that ever lived in the history of time are alive today, and they're on the internet in real time. That's why things are happening as quickly as they are. That's it. Those are the 4 areas. Ideas is a Nobel Prize. Patent, invention is a patent. The first thing that works is called a prototype, and then it's mass marketing. That's what's making the difference today. That's what the reason is. They're all alive. Nobody dies anymore. This is the strategic guidance. What I think is happening is many, many years ago, I used to lecture because I was in a marine engineering laboratory in Annapolis. Right across the river, they said, hey, we got some bright scientists across there. Have them come over and give lectures at the academy. So we used to. Not only were those fellows in the academy young, their mothers looked great. I mean, we're talking about a different time frame. But at that time, what we found out was when I lectured, I always told this story. It was coming in out at sea, and all of a sudden, the captain looks over and he sees the bearings are not changing, and the light is getting brighter, and it's getting brighter. So he yells to the signalman. He's coming in at night. He yells, blink them a signal. Tell that ship to go 10 degrees starboard. So he blinks it and gets back a signal from the other ship, and it says, you go 10 degrees port. He says, tell him this is a naval ship. Go 10 degrees starboard. So he blinks it back. He says, you go 10 degrees port. So the captain says, tell him this is Admiral James, and I have more firepower than any ship in the world. You go 10 degrees starboard. And he says, this is Seaman Smith, but you better go 10 degrees port. This is a lighthouse. There comes time when you've got to make change. And this is part of that time we're talking about now. I'll end on the Spanish Armada story. A long time ago, there's a Spanish Armada, and it's going out, and all of a sudden, from the lookout, yells down to the captain, 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 you've got 2 Spanish frigates up ahead. So he yells to the seaman, quickly, bring me my brown jacket. So he puts on his brown jacket, and he disposes of the 2 frigates, and he gives the brown jacket back. The next day, all of a sudden, he says, look out, yells, Captain, Captain, you've got 2 Spanish frigates and a galleon out there. He yells to the seaman, quickly, bring me my red jacket, puts on the jacket, dispenses both ships to the bottom of the ocean. So he's giving the jacket back, and the seaman says, sir, why do you put that red coat on? He said, son, I wear that red jacket, and perchance I should get wounded. The crew won't see the blood. All of a sudden, from the crow's nest. The lookout yells, "Captain, you got 2 Spanish galleons ahead of us, 2 Spanish frigates astern of aside of us, and astern of us is another Spanish galleon." And he yells to the young seaman, "Quickly, bring me my brown slacks." We haven't reached brown slack time. I think the cuts we're making in our budget across the board are probably correct. We're not getting into any wars anymore, and I think that we're going to be fortunate, but we have to watch long term. I think that's it. I thank you very much. It's about 2 minutes over.
Now, thank you, Dr. Citron. I was feeling good until Skynet became active in your future. But for our concluding remarks before Q&A, Dr. Rob Lieber.
Good morning. Pleased to be with you. No slides for 2 reasons. One, in 15 minutes, it's hard to do slides and talk. And the other is, I like to say, I paint pictures with words. The crux of my argument is evident in the subtitle of my book, Why the United States is Not Destined to Decline. I don't say why the U.S. will not decline, but why we're not destined to do so, i.e., it's not baked in the cake, instead it's contingent. I also want to add just an observation about prediction. Yogi Berra, famous Yankees catcher, once said, "Never make predictions, especially about the future." And while a lot of all this discussion is based on prediction, it's always useful to understand the limits of prediction. You can see it in 2 different national intelligence estimates from the NIE in 2004-2008. The 2004 estimate looking at American primacy into the indefinite future. Just 4 years later, they had practically turned around on a dime, talking about a multipolar world with the U.S. in far less good shape. I would suggest caution toward all predictions, both the optimistic ones and the pessimistic ones. I was part of a much smaller gathering in 2000 or 2001 for parts of the intelligence community and national security community, in which most of my learned colleagues were explaining why we wouldn't be fighting wars anytime in the foreseeable future. My comment was much more sarcastic, saying, I can't tell you when and how, but the notion that this will not be the case I found very dicey. And 9/11 came along very quickly after that. In other words, uncertainties, the kinds of parameters that you use in setting up your models, and black swans, that is completely unanticipated events, occur more often than we'd like to think. So yes, we need to look at these broader trends, but a certain healthy skepticism, looking out for black swans and dicey predictions is well worth having. I will say that for now, the idea of decline at home and abroad is pervasive. To some extent, I agree with Ian Bremmer's talk and tend to disagree with members of a panel that will occur later this afternoon. But if you type the words decline of America into Google, depending on when you do it, you will get anywhere from 20 million to about 98 million hits. In other words, the idea is pervasive. Much of the American public, Chinese leaders, much of the blogosphere, a lot of public intellectuals are convinced about America's decline and assume it's pretty much fated or baked in the cake. You can find all kinds of talking heads who make the argument. Even Superman, the legendary comic book figure, has recently given up his American citizenship. But it's not only some of these internet sages and public intellectuals and others, but plenty of very thoughtful people think so too. Henry Kissinger, I think one of the handful really of strategic thinkers and policymakers who deserve to be listened to, has written, "The United States cannot afford another decline like that which has characterized the past decade and a half. Only self-delusion can keep us from admitting our decline to ourselves, unquote. Anybody want to guess when Kissinger wrote that? Well, he wrote it in the early part of his 1961 book, The Necessity for Choice. That is, he wrote it 51 years ago. Kissinger's a smart, thoughtful man, a strategic thinker, but even he got it wrong. Why is that the case that so many people have a tendency to extrapolate from short-term circumstances? And certainly, recent years, we've faced not only the great recession, financial crisis, real estate crash, but the grinding experience of 2 wars, the rise of China, and so forth. I think that a lot of the contemporary estimates, current estimates, about the U.S. situation, power transition cycles, and so forth, overemphasizes short-term material factors and fails to take a longer view. Of course, we face serious problems at home and abroad. Let me say, we've always faced serious problems. I don't mean to just brush those off, but you need some perspective. A lot of what's being said about China now was said about Japan a quarter century ago. Yes, I know China is far more formidable. The issues are significantly different, but it ought to be a caution to us. We have terrific problems here at home involving the debt, entitlements, the deficit, the costs of health care, and so forth. But in relative terms, vis-a-vis other actors, in virtually all the dimensions by which we measure power, the U.S. margin remains very great. There is a serious intellectual failing in a lot of the declinist literature and analysis. An awful lot of people who should know better compare the experience of the United States, say from World War II to the present, with the kind of cycle experienced by Great Britain over the course of a century and a half, or the experience of the Roman Empire. That is, talk of rise and fall of great powers. For example, Paul Kennedy got rich on a book written a quarter century ago on that concept. The problem is that whereas, say, Great Britain 100 years ago had already been overtaken by Germany and the United States in the key material indicators, population, industrial strength, armed forces potential, and so forth, the United States margin, even today, even with our problems, even with attrition across certain kinds of industries, still remains far ahead of all its international competitors, including China. I won't repeat things that you're already well aware of. I'll just touch on the headlines. The size, breadth, and depth of our economy, the strength of the dollar, America's share of world GDP, not measured by purchasing power parity, which the IMF warns is not the most relevant or useful indicator for comparing internationally, but based on market exchange rates. By that indicator, the U.S. economy today, using IMF data, is still twice the size of the economy of China. We represent 21% of the world's GDP in market exchange rates, China 10.5%. Is the gap narrowing? Yes, it is, but a talk about China catching up with us almost immediately is for that reason exaggerated. And the still more important indicator, which is GDP per capita at market exchange rates, the U.S. is at least 8 times better off, 8-to-1 per capita than China, and that margin is not going to shrink dramatically, is not going to be eroded or done away with in our lifetimes. The military realm is one in which the U.S. still retains enormous advantages. The other point I want to make on military expenditures is to offer a quick disagreement with Undersecretary Work, who spoke this morning. He made the point that at $701 billion, I think that was last year's complete figure with supplementals, we were spending more in real terms even than in the early 50s. Well, there's a problem with that statement. It's true, but its relevance is problematic. In 1953, toward the end of the Korean War, we were spending 14.2% of GDP on defense. 14.2%. Now we are spending, as we've wound down in Iraq, we're beginning to wind down in Afghanistan, we're spending 4.7% of GDP, and that figure will have been reduced to about 3.7 or so by the middle of this decade. In short, we are not being bankrupted by our military spending. There are all kinds of issues, and they're going to be the subject of this debate. But the importance of that GDP indicator, military spending as a share of GDP, is extremely pertinent to debates about America's potential and often emphasized. Just to touch on the headlines, America's great research universities, its research and development, our science, innovative tech capacity, high technology are unparalleled anywhere in the world. Our population is the world's third largest and growing. Our demography and birth rate and immigration put us in an advantageous position versus most other key international actors, including China. Our competitiveness, even with our recent problems, remains among the top half dozen countries in the world, and no large, important country has anything like our degree of competitiveness. Our energy resources, our oil and natural gas, have experienced a renaissance which has been barely noticed until just the last year or so, but is having a transformative effect on our competitiveness, our industrial picture, our employment, our economic growth, and in our vulnerability in economic and security terms because of the rapid way in which oil import dependence is ratcheting down. Let me note also that the breakthroughs in energy technology in recent years have not been achieved through state capitalism. Compare that with Jimmy Carter's White Elephant Synfuel program in the late 70s that wasted $65 billion, or to cite a current poster child for this, $500 million on the Solyndra bankruptcy. The point, finally, is that the United States, in material terms, is far better off and far more dominant than often given credit for. Our resilience, flexibility, and adaptability, above all, are historical characteristics. Ian Bremmer quoted the famous Winston Churchill line. I prefer the line from Tocqueville, which makes the point more eloquently. Tocqueville, writing in the 1830s, said, quote, "The great privilege of the Americans does not consist in being more enlightened than any other nations, but in being able to repair the faults they commit," unquote. I think that speaks eloquently to the American situation and the American predicament. The real decisive factors are ideational: policy, beliefs, choices, leadership, especially about getting our debt deficit and entitlements under control in ways that are doable. The more doable, the sooner we act. The harder and more costly, the longer we delay. There are reasons for relative optimism. Let me add, in the foreign policy realm, it's how you interpret this question of America's strength, capacity, and so forth has a critical role in the judgments you make about what America's foreign policy role should be. America needs to make prudent choices in defense, but it's a myth that a serious retrenchment, offshore balancing, pulling back, will help America's national interests instead of damaging it. I'm with those who see a world from which the U.S. begins to pull back as a world one in which the rising powers, the emerging powers, the BRICS, will not pull their weight, will not contribute to global order, but instead a world which will be more disorderly, more dangerous, less prosperous, and more threatening to America's national interests. In sum, The bottom line is America has the capacity, the resources, the flexibility, and adaptability to maintain a leading international role and meet our needs and objectives to sustain American power here at home. Decline is a choice, not a fate. In short, America is not destined to decline. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lieber. We have 26 minutes for questions, so please use your microphone because we do have people off-site that need to hear you.
My name is Michael Perks from Old Lyme, Connecticut. I have a question for Susan Avery. It seems to me that I'm rather agnostic with regard to the human impact on global warming. And it seems to me that from the 17th century onward, we burned an awful lot of fossil fuels. We cut down most of our forests to burn wood. And in the Industrial Revolution, we discovered coal. I can remember a time in London in the 1940s when I spent my day in the smog. I would come home in the evening and wipe my brow, and it would be full of oil. I also watched the transition in London of when we became a smokeless zone, and it seems to me that the air has certainly cleaned up a lot from that time. I've got two questions. One is, do you think that we have inherited our CO2 problems perhaps from that period, from the past, and how much more do you think we have CO2 pollution compared to that period going forward? My last question is, what impact do you feel the Milankovitch cycles and the ocean currents may have as a natural cause of global warming? Thank you.
Okay, if I can address the CO2 question. If you go back and look over the historic record, both from an instrumented record and also from proxy measurements, you can easily see the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the more rapid increase over the last 100 years or so, and certainly over the last 50 or 60 years. Those measurements are pretty solid. You can actually look at the chemical composition of that carbon dioxide, and you can see that it's coming certainly from fossil fuels, dinosaur age stuff. So the real question is, and we're destined to be looking at carbon dioxide levels on the planet that are fairly high, certainly high over the time frame that human beings have been on the planet, or a lot of human beings have been on the planet. And the thing, of course, about these greenhouses, these radiation trapping, these heat trapping gases, it's not just carbon dioxide, there's other heat trapping gases that are going in there as well, is of course that they stay around a long time. And so the effects that you see can last a long period of time. There are natural cycles in the climate. The Milankovitch cycles are certainly one of them. But if you look, the real issue is what are you looking at the change over, and when I said in my remarks, the change is occurring how, where, and how fast. That's the issue. It's that we're making these changes over very, very short times relative to what we've seen in the geological past. And our ability and the planet's ability to adapt, okay, or evolve, is compromised in a way because they don't have the time to evolve. And so the real question in moving forward is where the planet is going is how fast these changes are occurring, and they're changing over periods of time that are much, much faster or much, much shorter than necessarily the planet has time to adapt to. And so that's the biggest sort of one of the real challenges is basically how fast things are going. There will be more carbon dioxide. I think that we're certainly working on alternative energy strategies I'm certainly waiting for the next disruptive technology and photon conversion to electricity and what we might do with solar energy. But right now, I think you can see that we're still destined to be using fossil fuels. Certainly natural gas is better than dirty coal. And so there are alternatives that we can make, and there are alternatives that we can make in terms of what we decide to build our infrastructure on how clean we intend to support them. I obviously have concern about how we drill in the deep ocean for these resources. I have concern about how we might be drilling in the Arctic in the future, just because of these sort of very precious ecosystems that we don't know a heck of a lot about and don't know necessarily what's going to happen to them in terms of loss of ecosystem services to us and to the planet. I mean, we're reaching 10 billion people. That's a lot of people. A big forcing function.
I can make this work. I'm Gordon Comerford from Marco Island, Florida, and I have a question for Dr. Citron. And it has to do with religion, your outlook on the various religions of the world and the effect you see from it.
Yes, I did write a book on religion. I got more negative comments than you ever saw in your life. And the reason is I wrote the article based on what I saw. And most people profess they go to religion, some go Christmas, sometimes they go to one or two other things, and when they're close to death, they get scared, they become religious again. But generally speaking, the more education that someone has, the least religion they believe in. That's not supposed to be good or bad. It's just the way it is. Also, we're finding as the kids grow up today, the more intermarriage there is among groups, the least religious there are. And it also depends on the house of worship they go to. So what we're happening over time is, believe it or not, the numbers showed the more educated, the least religious. The older they get, the more religious. And these were the facts we got, and I got more negative comments on this than anything I've ever done in my professional career. And I've had 36 books published. This was a horror. I mean, the religious people got upset because they said, you're saying things that aren't true, and then the people who are not religious saying, you're making it look like religion is true. You can't win. Best that you don't write about it and forget it.
Great. In front.
I'm Barry Posen. I teach at MIT, and I'm speaking this afternoon. I have a question for Marvin Citron. Admiral Nelson is famously said to have said that a ship's a fool to fight a fort. And in World War II, for the Americans to fight forts, we had to concentrate really massive resources to do it. And I wonder, given a kind of integrated look at what you take to be the evolution of military technology, especially naval technology, all other things being equal, do you think a ship's still a fool to fight a fort? Is the advantage going to remain, say, with a littoral power? Or has something happened that's changed the essential balance between, say, the offshore attacker and the shore-based defender?
My personal opinion in this, and it's my personal opinion, we did some research on it, but let me tell you what I think. The probabilities of war, especially world wars, are going down, more as we have more communications, and because of the alternatives. Let's be brutally blunt. Some of the weaponry we have today, for the first time in history, we could destroy the world 7 times over just based on our own nuclear arsenals. Why the world's got to be destroyed 7 times, I don't know. Once would be sufficient in my imagination. But generally speaking, it gets to the point where all the equipment we've got, and because of we have in science and technology, and because of the good negotiations between people who are trying to stop wars, I think the chances of war is less. The problem is, as I said, the weaponry we have today and the science and technology means that it could be really, really disastrous. So I think we almost have to say, hey, wait a minute, short of war, what have we got to be doing? I think part of it is because of the scientific breakthroughs and the technology and the weaponry, but a thing that really helps here is communications. We have better communications among everybody and quicker communications that says, hey, wait a minute, ease up, let's make sure we understand each other. I think one of the biggest things that happened was the hotline between the U.S. and Russia. We had the red phone there, and I think it helped us long term. The only thing that probably would have helped us better is to be able to talk to God as a local call. But the truth is, the potentials for war, I think, have been reduced. And part of it's because of communications, and part of it's because people know more and the side effects.
My name is Rudy Anding. I'm a retired German diplomat living in Miami, Florida. Dr. Citron gave us a fascinating view into the future, dominated by robots, computers, and so on. What are the costs of this? Of course, we will have fewer human costs, fewer losses of life. But in view of the current budgetary discussion, could you please try to also take a shot at what this will be as far as costs are concerned? Will we really save in dollars and cents?
Yes. You'll save a lot, and basically it's not going to cost government funds. Most of the robotic work, most of the communications work, except for the classified stuff for DARPA, NSA, and the other stuff, most of it's being done by private corporations. And they make money, so they get involved in this, and I think we'll all be better off. Some of the things we're doing today, just because of communications, I think within 3 years, we'll have everybody's DNA and everything interacted, and within 5 years, there'll be a chip in most people's bodies where they get in, and if you're hurt, no matter where, they'll run it and have all your medical records, what medicines you can't use, what the potential problems are. They're starting this in the service right now with the DNA studies. I think it's going to be across the whole board. And because of all the information we have, and because we know more about the interactions on medicines, I think we're going to be healthy, we're going to live longer, and much more productive lives.
Yes, sir. My name's Carl Schuster. I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii. As we look at all this robotics and unmanned aircraft and stuff, is anyone giving any thought to that we may be looking at war as a sanitary operation? If we're looking at the cost from our side, is war going to suddenly become, or I should say conflict, since we're negating state-on-state conflict, are we risking the danger that politically war can be more acceptable if it's conducted against those who can't strike back?
I'm not sure I comprehend. What are you, because of robotics, because of technology?
Yes, sir. There's no risk to our people. In other words, one of the things that deters some elements of war from a political perspective is the cost, the political cost to the person that sent them. Wars become unpopular as our losses increase, etc. If robots are doing the fighting and the dying, and they're not voters, does that make war more politically acceptable if we're competing against someone who can't strike back in a similar fashion? It's perhaps beyond this discussion, but I wonder sometimes if we should think about that.
I think I have, part of that answer was one I got from one of the kids in high school. He said, if the computers are going to be brighter than us, and they can compute quicker than us, and we can put feelings into computers, and by the way, you can, they said, what do they need us for? And that's why I came out with that statement that in 2030, and if we're, even with computer chips, so we have that fast thinking and getting information and everything else, and the computers are that good and productivity goes up like crazy, and it will, it means unemployment goes up like crazy. Do we go to a 30-hour week? Do we go to a 20-hour week? Do we stay home? Does everything, is it done for us? And these are the young kids talking. The older people said, good, I'll be home, it's okay, it's not a problem. Kids are saying, what do I do? Where am I going to work? What am I going to do to make a living? My answer is you don't have to make a living. You may only go in, your vocation could be your avocation. We'll be doing a lot less. Productivity will be high. We'll be increasing agricultural outputs. And the answer is, that brings a lot of questions. That's when this kid came up, and I put it in a slide. Will these computers or computer operation, will they keep us as pets if we're not required? And what does it mean? What does work mean if you don't have to work? If you have all the food you want, the housing is made by robots, everything is taken care of for you, your education and the arts and things would be important. But it makes for it's a different thought structure, it's a different attitude. And as we get older, in this area it's not so important. But for the kids, they really see it as a major change. And I think it is, and I don't think we've discussed it enough.
My name is Chaplain Stoglin. I'm the Regimental Chaplain, 14th Marines. Before I ask a question, I know they said don't make a comment, and I won't preach today. But sir, American University is United Methodist, Boston University is United Methodist, Princeton is Presbyterian, Harvard and Yale were created for United Congregational Ministers. So I'm just wondering if some of those people tapped into that position, that the more educated you are, the less religious you are. But that's not my question.
Thank you.
Understanding, this is for the entire panel, understanding that you're not theologians, we're not trying to make you that this morning, given the perspectives you have provided, such as the climate issues, futuristic implications, and the political implications of the U.S. as it finds itself today, what are the implications for the global religious communities as you see it, particularly as it addresses its people of faith?
When we took a quick look at religion, and I said I get more damn comments on this than anything else, but the poorer the country is, in general, the more religious they are. If you go back to the very beginning, we used to pray to fire because we didn't understand it. We used to pray to water because we needed it to live. We prayed, we had special gods. Then all of a sudden, someone had a great idea, said, why we keep getting these goats and having them burnt as a burnt sacrifice and this? Get one God. Put them together, we can save money. So the idea of monotheism came up. It was a good idea. The next thing they said is, we don't need any. And there's a lot of people that may agree or disagree. But we found in general, the poorer the country is, and the least they have, the more religious, because they want to have something to hope for, to pray for. They want that, and religion meets that need. It's a great way of saying, I don't have to pray to somebody here on the earth or to something this. There's a supreme being, or many, depending on the time frame, that we can hope for something better, because I can't depend on man to make jobs for me. I can't depend on man to make good crops. I can't, that sort of thing. So religion really becomes more important the poorer you are and where you have less to hope for. And I don't know if that's correct or not, because I sure in hell am not a theologian.
I want to add one additional dimension. I don't necessarily disagree grosso modo, but I can think of an important exception. Obviously, the subject of violent radical Islamism has become extremely pertinent over the last decade, even though to its discredit, the administration refuses to use the I word in any of its official documents, or at least has until recently. The leaders of groups like Al-Qaeda and affiliated or comparable organizations are often people who are highly educated. That is to say, they've been educated as doctors. The current head of Al-Qaeda, for instance. Others have been engineers, city planners, and so forth. What's operating there is something altogether different from what Marvin has referred to. There, it's a reaction of they and their followers, a violent reaction, I think, at the frustration in their societies, of the failure of certain societies to satisfy, to grapple with, to deal with the economic, social, and political needs of their own societies. And as those societies, which have stagnated in many respects over 4 centuries, say, as those problems have become more acute, this reaction has become more violent and intense, often pushed off into the search for scapegoats, conspiracy theories, and the most violent and demonic interpretations about the West, America, Jews, and even domestic and, say, secularists. That's a subset of this problem, but it's a very real one. The interesting question will be whether the Arab awakening that has been taking place since February of last year will act as a safety valve and maybe change some of the orientations, or whether it can have a very different and less optimistic set of outcomes. But it's a really big question that combines a good deal of what we've been discussing.
May I make a comment on that? Let me say that not all Muslims are terrorists.
Excuse me, but I was deliberately careful to say that I was talking about violent radical Islamism, which is not Islam. I'm afraid it's inappropriate to segue that way.
I gotta say,
the terminology is critical.
Yeah. Let me put it to you another way.
Marv,
I think
Marv,
there's a problem.
Yeah.
Let's.
All right,
There is a. When I said I had this at a meeting, a town hall, and they said, "Are all Muslims terrorists?" And I said, "Obviously, that's a stupid thing. They're not." And I agree with you completely. Hey, Marv, I have to. But all terrorists. Oh, okay. But all
Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't mean to create this.
Okay.
But what I want to end in saying, if I could, and I'll sit down, ma'am, to give you deference, but as a chaplain, and we help create the Navy Academy, we have people on submarines who have dangerous packages. We have people on ships. We have people who are specially trained. Do we, hearing this, say to them, you don't have to be moral? I'm not saying that, but that's the question that as chaplains, when I went to a CACO this past Sunday morning and told the father his son was no longer alive, he didn't ask me about computers, he asked me some very deep questions. So, and he was a Marine. So I'm just saying, we look out in this audience, and whether we are believers or not, our people are in some way. And I want to tell that 19-and-a-half-year-old Marine, or that 50-something-year admiral or general, there is a moral higher ground. And if we don't, what is the button to these robots and the weapons mean? That's what we're trying to look at.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you for that, and that'll give us, help us feed our discussion at lunch. Now, we're going to stop a little early. It's important for us to get back on time for the afternoon schedules for other of our speakers and panelists, so I want to get back on time. So we'll break for lunch, and we'll be back in our seats at 1:15.